Good afternoon, everybody. So I thought I would take a few minutes because I had a couple of guns out, and we would do an Arken review. I know there's like a million of these things, but I haven't seen one compared to the Kahles 525i DLR. So, take it with a grain of salt. I'm comparing like a $400 optic, a $500 optic to a $3,500 optic, and when you add the mounts and stuff like that, you're well over $4,000. So take it for what it is. There's definitely going to be some differences there, and we'll talk about those. But I thought, well, since we had the scopes, let's give it a talk. So this is the Arken SH4 Gen 2. This is the Arken EP5, and this is the Kahles 525i DLR. So I think if you don't have a big budget, the Arken EP5 is the way to go if you're shooting competition with it. And the reason why I say that is it's a little more flexible. I feel like with the glass clarity is pretty good, but that it actually has 10 mils on the turret. So I don't really care about the glass quality. I feel like there definitely is a better, clearer glass on the EP5. But with the SH4, I also didn't feel like I couldn't see the targets, if that makes sense. So there's the SH4 Gen 2 definitely has a tighter eye box, I feel like, than the EP5. And it's tighter than the Kahles. So like if you get shaky in your fundamentals at all and not get the best cheek weld or something like that, you're going to see nothing but black with the SH4 Gen 2. And I ran into that when I was positional shooting. So if I was like semi-prone or prone, I never had any issues that way. And honestly, I beat the crap out of this SH4 Gen 2 a couple times on accident. So I'm not a person that's like, let's do a brutal test to see if my scope breaks. But it did pretty good. So I'll move this kind of closer. You can see some damage right here on the ring. It was because I was on a PRS barricade, and I misjudged the depth a little bit, or my depth perception was off a little bit, and I accidentally slammed the windage turret really hard into that barricade, and you can see I did scratch the finish off of it. And so I honestly, because I actually hit on the bell of the housing, and then it came back and hit here really hard, I was honestly really worried that I might have damaged the scope or moved the zero, and I didn't damage the scope, and it hit the targets. So tracking is really good on it. The only issue that I ran into is that on the farther targets, I needed, like, when I was getting up to 1,000 yards or a little past 1,000 yards, I needed over 8 mils. And so I just didn't like that I didn't have 10, so then I would have to go, and then I was looking at the next number that's higher. So you can see, like, when you get to 1, you got like a 9 right here. And so you had to kind of like make a mental note of that. So I actually got myself confused, and as a newer shooter, and I'm going to assume the people that are using an Arken are going to be a newer shooter, your stress is going to be higher and stuff like that, and so you have the potential of making mistakes, and I did. I actually dialed a mil higher than I should have on one of them and shot high. Now, I seen it in the scope. I was able to spot my shots. I don't look for trace, so I'm not going to say I could see it or not see it, because I never look for it. I actually just look to see, because I'm shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor. If there's a berm or anything behind there, you will see grass moving or dirt flying or something if you miss. So I seen where I missed. made the correction in the scope and used the tree to correct it, and I made the following 2 shots at 1,035 yards, and I got hit. So, but I could see that I shot high. So that's one thing about it that I didn't like, was that only going to 8 mils caused me some problems. Now, if you're not shooting competition and you're just shooting with your friends, and you're out in the desert or someplace that has 1,000 yards, you know, it's maybe not going to be that big of a deal because you're not going to have the stress of trying to dial. So if you have a limited budget and you can't move to the EP5, buy the EP4. Just be aware that it has a tighter eye box. The glass is plenty clear for what you need it for, and dial into 8 mils. Just don't get confused on where you're at. But it does have a 0 stop, so if you did, just dial it back down to the 0 and start over. That would be my thing. So I shot this in a couple competitions this year. I actually was using the Gen 2 when I got a top gas gun finish, actually. So that was pretty cool. So the EP5 has clear glass. I can see better definition with it. The biggest thing that I like about it, the 6 to 24 or the 5 to 25, it didn't matter because I shoot mostly on like 18 to 20 power, so they both were perfectly fine that way. This was a little brighter. This got a little bit darker, the SH4 did, on higher magnification. This stayed a little bit clearer, and I think it's because it has a 56 millimeter bell. Maybe that lets more light in. I'm not an optics engineer or anything, so I don't know from that standpoint. But I did have a better performance in terms of targets hit and things like that with the EP5, and I think it was just because on the higher dials, you know, it had 10 mils, and I never needed over 10, but I could dial to like 9.8 or whatever I needed to get where I needed to go. I don't use illumination that much, so I'm not going to really talk about it. I don't think you really need it for shooting competition. If you're hunting in low light with it, it might make a pretty good difference, just so you can light that reticle on a low magnification. If you're shooting at dusk, I like the throw levels. The bubble levels worked fine, so I think it's a pretty good setup overall. And if you can do a little bit more, this will be a little bit more flexible with shooting like a 22, because it goes down to 25 yards on the Parallax, and I think the Gen 2 does, if I can quote myself, I think it only goes down, I guess it does go down to 25. Where it adjusts differently is the 500. The Parallax is like 500 to infinity. That's what the difference was. So for long range shooting, the SH4 is lacking a little bit compared to the EP5, because you can do a little bit finer adjustment on the Parallax, because the Parallax goes to 1,000, gives you a little bit more, and then goes to infinity. And I found that I had less parallax error with this guy versus that one, and it's just because this has a little bit more finer adjustment. So that's the other thing. If you're shooting like a non-22 PRS shoot and you're shooting center fire rifles, I feel the EP5 is the way you want to go, just because of that as well too. And so I found that it had less parallax shift. But if you have good fundamentals and you're behind it, you know, even if you're off on the most extreme, your parallax at 100, you know, if you were like looking to the far edge and had a parallax shift all the way to the end of your housing, your parallax will never be wider than, error will never be wider than this, and that would be, you'd be looking at a black scope basically. So like if you had a little bit of a shift here and you're shooting to 500 yards, you're probably not going to have any issues. So it's just when you're shooting at the longer range and you get 3/10 or 4/10 shift, that would make you miss the target. So it's more of a concern if you're shooting in a PRS competition in that standpoint. If you're shooting minute a deer, it shouldn't be an issue. So that kind of covers these two. And so what are you getting with the Kahles that I think kind of, let me move this guy out of the way. that I feel like you're going to get a big benefit from. It's a bigger scope, so this dang thing is probably like a half an inch longer than the EP5, so it's a bit of a long scope. So one thing I really like about the Kahles over the EP4 or EP5 is it's definitely clearer at a higher magnification. Like if you go to 18 here, go to 18 here, go to 18 here, this is going to be a brighter scope by a lot. I would say that you would see a noticeable difference. That doesn't mean you can't see. Crap. Sorry about that. I had something fall off my shelf. It's just going to be that this is going to give you a clearer image, but I could still see with both of those the same thing. It's just color definition is going to be different. Low light conditions, this is going to smoke both of those by a lot. So that's where I think you would notice a difference. But I've never shot a PRS match in the dark. So remember, this is, pretty top tier, so you're going to get the better light transmission with it. And that's the big difference I feel you're getting. Most people, I mean, if I sat somebody behind these two scopes and said, tell me the difference, they would probably have a hard time telling you the difference between them. And so that would be the big deal there. I really like the parallax adjustment because this is a little bit easier to change on the fly. So like say you're getting some parallax error, this you could adjust a little bit easier versus trying to reach on the inside of your bubble level or something like that. If you're a right-handed shooter. Now if you're a left-handed shooter, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal because you're going to have your bubble level on this side of your gun, so then it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But it's just that these knobs, and that would go for any of these scopes that are right side windage, left side parallax, and illumination if it has it. So that's why I like the Kahles, is because of that. I took off the throw levers. So the throw lever, one of the negatives, was that it wouldn't make the clearance under my mount here. So this is a spur mount. And so it did so I can use the throw lever, which it has a big enough knob up here, then it's smooth enough that I don't feel like I needed it anyways. I like that it has, so when I'm doing my pre-check before your stage, I like that everything's on one side here, so you can make sure if you dialed windage, you could have your windage knob set back to 0. If it, and then that you zeroed out your turret here. I like this because it lets you dial a little bit under, and so sometimes you might actually need to do that in very few cases, especially if you're shooting extreme angle or something like that and it's a short target. You might need to dial under. Your zero gets jacked up a little bit, and or your BC changed or something of that nature. You could dial a little under and then correct that couple tenths in your ballistics calculator, so it will take into account for that. So then your new zero could be 2 tenths under. You can't do that with these guys without letting go of the zero stop altogether. So that's a benefit, I feel like. The Kahles inside this cap here, which is their the illumination knob, there's actually the tool to slip your turrets back to 0, where you'd have to keep a separate tool here. Obviously that's not a big deal. The big thing is it's definitely a clearer scope. I can use this all the way to 25 and get pretty much the same clear as if I was using it on 15, so that's the difference. These two definitely get darker as you dial up the light on them, or you get less light transmission, which makes them a little bit darker. When you turn it to higher magnification, the internals are a little bit, the lenses are obviously not as good, so that does make a difference. I like here to, this has also, as you go around to the second revolution, you get this, you can feel this guy here. There's a little red knob that pops up to let you know you're on your second revolution. There's quite a few other scopes that have that. That's the main difference, though, is that, you know, this is a little bit set up better, I feel like, for shooting. The other thing for PRS, and the other thing is that on the windage turret here, there's another turret that you can see me turning that will kind of keep you from accidentally grabbing onto one of these and turning it, so it's harder to turn this knob. So if you catch it in clothing, or you're putting your rifle cover on, you pull your rifle cover off and it grabbed, it's not going to adjust the turrets. I didn't really have that to be an issue with the Arken though either, so I think that's, if you're doing your pre-stage check, even if it did turn it, you'd notice it and turn it to 0, because before my stage I set my parallax. I set, if I have to dial, I dial to the first target, and I make sure my windage is at 0 or wherever I want it to be. I don't dial wind, so my turrets are always at 0. I like the reticle in both, so they're both usable. They're both really good. I don't feel like either one, you know, between the Kahles or the EP5 or SH4, they're all good. They're 210s. This, the Kahles is less busy, so if you like a less busy reticle, it's a little less busy that way. The rifle it's sitting on is, I know a lot of people are going to hate this, but it's a 224 Valkyrie. I really like the Valkyrie. It shoots really great. I have an MDT grip on it, so it's very vertical. I really like that. It's thick too, so but that's kind of like the breakdown. This does not come with a mount. It doesn't come with scope caps. So, you know, if you're buying a pretty good mount, you're talking $450. The scope caps are going to cost you like $80. The throw lever comes with it, so that's kind of cool. Bubble levels like another $60. So, you know, when you factor that in, what are we at? $4,000, couple $100 plus tax, and so, you know, there's a pretty big difference there in terms of cost. This is a very usable scope for PRS. Honestly, the Kahles has a tight eye box too. It's not very forgiving, or they call it like a depth of view, and so you kind of have to be behind this guy too pretty good. I think these two are kind of on par with each other, to be honest with you, in terms of like depth of view. Now, maybe the EP5 might be a little bit better actually, but this will let you know that your parallax is a little bit off more, because your image is going to get a little bit blurrier, where this doesn't, so it's harder to notice parallax error. And so this here, I think, is a little bit better from that standpoint. The Kahles has a wider field of view by a long shot. I haven't measured it, but at like, looking at like 600 yards with this compared to this, you're seeing a lot more, probably 20% more field of view than the EP5. But remember, 4,600 something, I think, right? So, but I didn't feel like I was lacking anything. I actually had this scope on this rifle the last PRS match I had, and that was June 16th, I think. And so it did perfectly fine. I didn't feel like I was lacking anything there. So like the Kahles is somewhat newer to me, and so this will be going with me to the next match. I do have I'll be adding a Picatinny rail up here, and I use a crush it timer just to slow me down because of the gas gun. I tend to run a little bit too quickly, and so I'll have a bunch of time left over at the end. But overall, I think between the Arkens, I think the EP5, if you're shooting centerfire PRS, is kind of like the must-have over the SH4 Gen 2, just because of the parallax settings and the being able to dial the 10 mils. But if you're just shooting with your friends and your budget won't allow you to do the extra $100, then do the SH4 Gen 2, and I don't think that you'll be upset with that purchase either. If you're shooting 22s, I don't know too many people that are shooting past 500 yards, and I don't know of too many PRS or NRL 22 that are like much past 300 yards, but I don't shoot that, so please don't take that as gospel. I know there are some people that shoot like 700 yards with their 22, so that probably takes a lot of different skill and equipment. But I think if you're shooting centerfire, definitely do the EP5 over the SH4 Gen 2 if you can afford it. If you have an endless budget and you want that little bit of edge, this will give you the little bit of edge. But I think for a new shooter who's never shot a PRS match before, and you compared this guy to the EP5, they might not notice the difference or the benefits of the Kahles until after they shot a couple PRS matches. And then when you're settled down, you don't have all those stresses or as many stresses, because less things are new. You're going to notice the difference between the Kahles and the Arken EP5 on that aspect. So that's just kind of like a breakdown of comparing an Arken SH4 Gen 2 to the EP5, and from the EP5 to the Kahles 525i DLR. So they have a regular 525i, that's the older version. The DLRs came out last year, I think. And so all three of them, though, work. The turrets, they track the same. Like if my dope was 9 mils and I dialed 9 mils there, I dialed 9 mils there, I didn't miss because I was off from the mils, okay? Or the turrets weren't tracking, so the turrets tracked fine. I didn't have any issue. I almost like how tall the EP5 turrets are. And I think the numbers are super clear. The other thing I like over the Arken over this guy here, I like that they have big numbers and that the clicks, there's some space in between them, so they're not too tight together where you're accidentally dialing like a tenth or two past. Like some scopes have really tight dials. I like that after you go past 10, it tells you like above on the Arken, like, hey, now I'm at 11. Like if I dialed here, you see the 11 above the 1, so then, hey, I'm on 11 mils. Here, if you dialed 11 mils on this guy, you won't see a number. You get this raised button up, so then you're on your second revolution, but then you're doing math. So, and we know that under stress, you can have a diminished ability to do math and a lot of different things. That's why, like, when people run under stress, they tend to forget what they did and stuff like that. They can't tell you the full step 1, step 2 of what I did. And so that's maybe a negative here on this guy. So I don't feel like the Kahles is perfect. I don't feel like the Arken's perfect. I think they each have their own benefits and places, and I feel that if you do one or the other, you're not going to be lacking anything to where you're going to be like upset about it or bummed out about it or anything like that. You're going to get what you need from both, and including the SH4 in terms of tracking reliability. I don't know long term the Arken, because they haven't been around as long. Like Kahles has been around over 100 years, so you got some of the lineage that you're buying there. European, German shot glass, you know, Japanese glass. It's definitely clear. Chinese glass, I mean, that's pretty good too. I'll be honest with you. Like I said, you'd have a hard time if you didn't look behind these a lot to tell the difference, to be honest with you. And you're not missing targets because you can't see them with any of these three. I feel like you can see. This is definitely going to do better at the night time, or at a dusk period of time. But just be mindful, does have a tight eye box on the SH4 Gen 2. The EP5 is a little better, but it's still pretty tight. But so is the Kahles, and the Kahles is known for that too. So, you know, if you want something with a very forgiving eye box, that Leopold Mark V is, from my understanding of talking to other people that have it, they really, man, that thing's really forgiving in their eye box. And so, but it's got a depth of view that you could be off on your parallax and it's going to be really clear on that scope as well. But it's harder to see the parallax error, which can be negative for long range. Now, I don't think that applies to PRS as much because, let's just face it, we're setting our parallax. So if you know you're going out to 700 or 800, but you have a 500 target, I'll like split the difference to then, you know, kind of help out with that offset. But that's really it. So I hope this is maybe beneficial to you. I've seen a lot of reviews of people comparing the two, but I don't know if I've seen anybody who actually shot a PRS match with all three of these and then given a review on why they liked each one and what the opportunities of each one are. I know that I've seen a guy that kind of shoots like some bench rest, kind of use it, and he compared some other optics to it, but I don't know if he ever shot a PRS match. At least I don't think he alluded that he did. So, and I don't think for bench rest that probably any of these scopes are appropriate. You probably need a little higher magnification, and I know there are some better options for that kind of thing. This, I feel, one thing I will add, if you have a high mirage day, this will look like it's cutting through the mirage better. That's not true. So mirage is mirage. You can't change it. It's just because you have such a clear view through this, it looks like it's cutting through that mirage better. But just optically, it's so much better that you get a clearer image to begin with, and you're just getting a little bit clearer image looking through that mirage. So you'll hear some people say, well, it's so much better in mirage. It gives you a clearer picture, but it doesn't cut through it better, if that makes sense, because the mirage is doing this out there with that boiling heat, and this can't change this from happening. So it's just giving you a clearer view. If you've hung in this long, I'm impressed because this has probably got a little bit boring, but here's some differences, and I hope it helps you make decisions on your Arken purchases, because I'm not pooping on either one of them. I think they're great scopes, and I can definitely afford quite a few more of the EP5s over this guy right here. So you can buy like 7 EP5s almost for getting you a setup like this. So there's 6. So that will, if that tells you anything, you can just scope a bunch more stuff. And as you can see, I have 2 Arkens sitting here. The SH4 Gen 2 is going with the Savage, so I won't have that too much longer. But the EP5 is not going anywhere. I'm going to keep that in inventory forever, and I'll probably buy one more of those if that says anything for other guns. So if people want to shoot a match with me, a friend or something like that, I have a couple PRS gas guns that I can use for PRS in different calibers, and so those will be sitting on that. The Kahles will get moved over to my 6GT. That's going to be that JP Enterprises build that I'm doing. And then I'll have an EP5 on this guy here, and another 6.5 Creedmoor of that. will have an EP5 on it. So I don't know if this helps you or not, but I think that's the major difference. I wouldn't say this is just as good as this. It does everything this does, though, if that makes sense. It just doesn't do it as good. So that means it's totally functional to shoot in a match. If you're missing targets, it isn't because of the scope, most likely. If you want to try out a match and you don't want to invest $10,000 into a rifle and you want to shoot production, or you want to shoot a gas gun because you have an AR-15 sitting in your stuff, buy the EP5. Use one of the codes that gives you the free mount, bubble level, scope caps, and some other stuff. Rex, I think, is the code that will give you, or Rex 5 or something, that will give you the free mount, bubble level, and free shipping. So I would do it. It's not affiliated to me. It's just a code I used when I bought mine. I bought the SH4 Gen 2 quite a long time ago. They were selling it for $349 when I bought that. And I think I had to pay $60 though for the mount and bubble level and stuff because they didn't have the code for free stuff that way. So they're about the $30 cheaper, or $30 more now than what I paid a year and a half or 2 years ago. So there wasn't like a big price difference there. But so I've had that Gen 2 quite a while, and it's been a great scope. And it's just the EP5 is a little bit better, and I like it better for what I shoot. So that's the only difference. And so it just makes the gun easier to sell if it's got a scope on it already. So, but you guys take it easy. Message me with any questions on them. And so I'll probably start doing some PRS positional setup videos. I see a lot of them for bolt guns, but I don't see really any for a gas gun. And so I think I'm going to do a whole series about building a position with a gas gun, what you got to do to make sure it's safe, so that way you can move and go through stages on how I do with it. I'm definitely not the best shooter, but I'm good enough to probably help you get started, and then take the garbage that you learned from me and make some adjustments to it, make it your own, or throw it out the window altogether and learn from somebody better. But those will be my next probably series of videos. Take it easy, everyone, and we'll get back to you if you have any questions.